Hello, everyone. This is Dan, and you are back with Alan Wake Remastered. So, we came into a new episode, which means at this time it's another manuscript reading for episode 4. Let me just make sure that episode 3 is one we went through. Yes, it was. All right, so let's go back and we'll go through the manuscripts in episode 4. Oh, I missed the page. And this one's only on hard difficulty. I did a pretty good job finding most of the manuscripts here. I'm really interested in seeing what these have to say. I hope you are too. And if you are, continue on with me. Otherwise, if you would prefer to keep on going with the game, please move on to the next episode. The next episode will have actual gameplay and move on with the story. But if you want to get into the lore and see what this game has as far as experiences, feel free to experience this with me. And with that said, let's go on to the first one, Thomas Zane's writing and assistant.
Zane could feel the poems, taking form, shaping things. As he experimented, he imagined he could almost feel the power surging through the keys of the typewriter. It exhilarated him. But there was fear, too. If not for his young assistant Emil, he would have given it up. But Emil convinced him otherwise. He too had a way with words.
Oh, this is interesting. So Zane also had a feeling too. He also had the typewriter, and just like Alan, he felt compelled to keep on typing. And for Zane, Emil, his assistant, had a way with words, so he was able to convince him and to push him into continuing writing. I wonder if at the time, if Emil was the one that was taken by the Dark Presence. I can't remember if Emil was the doctor. At first I was thinking that, but maybe not. The spray paintings though did say don't trust Emil.
Hartman kept talking, giving Barry the grand tour, clearly proud of the place. He went on and on about his hunting trophies, and Barry was impressed. But he was here on business. He raised his voice, cut through the monologue. "Hey, Hartman, where's Al?" Hartman stopped in mid-sentence, annoyed at the interruption. He nodded at the hulking orderly standing nearby. The man smiled and clapped a practiced hand on Barry's shoulder.
Yeah. If this was an actual novel and you were reading this is when you know that the doctor, Hartman, was clearly up to no good. Even had his goons with him? Jeez. Hartman watches Wake fall.
Hartman followed the fall of Alan Wake with his binoculars. When the rider hit the water, he ordered Jack to take the boat to him. The spot was easy to see in the dark, even with all the extra lights in the boat. The flare floated and kept burning even in the water. Jack turned the radio louder as the engine sputtered. The music was rough and clanking, something the Anderson brothers would no doubt have enjoyed. But Hartman chose to ignore it. Wake was finally within his reach.
Interesting. So Hartman knew something about Wake all along. Had his lackey follow him, pretend to have kidnapped Alice in order to get him to bring the manuscript. And even as his lackey was appearing to have been taken by the Dark Presence, as Alan finally met up with him, like he saw him fall over the edge, but the flare that seemed to have saved Alan from the Dark Presence before he fell into the water also was his downfall, because it allowed Hartman to follow him and actually pick him out of the water. Although I guess that's also a good thing, because then otherwise I guess Alan may have drowned. I don't know. I guess we'll just have to continue on. But yeah, he didn't drown, obviously. He got taken into the clinic. But yeah, Hartman, man. Hartman, ugh. Hartman's mission.
Hartman knew he was no creator. He had no ambitions on that front. And he certainly didn't want to end up like every artist he had worked with here, damaged in ways that were hard to describe, or worse. It was enough for Hartman to maintain creative control and provide direction, to be a producer. That was what most of these people were in need of anyway. Of course, suitable subjects were few and far in between.
if you recall from the earlier episodes, Hartman specializes with people who are creators. And it looks like that's no accident. He's looking for these people. I'm not like a real creative type myself. Like, I don't have a wild imagination or a vivid imagination. And so, I do what I can. Obviously, I'm here on YouTube. I mean, that's not huge considering that I'm playing video games basically. But it's interesting that he decided to, instead of cultivating what he does have, he instead decides that he'll be in the background, kind of edging people, getting people to want to do things his way, to see his way as the best way. And that's where they are now. Or were, because that place is no longer there. But how much did he know to begin with? Like, how much did he know? Like, did he know some of these other people also came into contact with the presence? Because the Anderson brothers, they seem to have known, or seem to have a sense of it. Wake sees the old god stage. Oh, this must be in the fields on their farm.
I stared at the Viking paraphernalia that littered the area, surrounding an unlikely centerpiece. A full-size stage complete with an impressive sound system with all the trimmings, including a dragon. It took a special kind of crazy to build something like this in a remote field. When the sky split open with a deafening boom and the music started blasting, it felt strangely appropriate.
That, I gotta say, that was a really interesting and a really imposing way to start a boss fight. I don't know. I guess there wasn't like one boss, but it was a fight that that is a culmination of some of the things that you've been traveling through. So it was a crazy fight, really crazy. I think that I finished it in one go, which is, if that's the case, that's amazing for me. I almost never get that. Barry attacked by a taken.
For the moment, Barry was just glad he had survived the fall. He had been separated from Al, and there was no easy way to climb back up. He told himself he'd be okay in the gloomy forest at night. He would just have to wait for a while for Al to find his way down. Barry turned when he heard the heavy footsteps and saw the movement. The man-shaped shadow lunged at him from the bushes, an axe held high. Barry screamed and threw up his hand. The world exploded.
I wonder if he had the flare gun, and that's what did it. Threw up his hand, assuming that he was holding a gun, because there was an explosive amount of light. So that's why I feel like it must have been a flare gun. And this was after Barry and Alan were in the car, and they were racing off to get to the Anderson's farm, and then they got sideswiped by the dark presence and then fell off a cliff in the car. Then they got separated. Mott in charge.
Mott knew that Wake was smarter than him. Wake had more money, a beautiful wife, everything. And Hartman said Wake was important. That made him better than Mott. But Mott was calling the shots now. He'd expected Wake to whimper and grovel, but instead, he seemed willing to fight. Mott knew he'd gotten under Wake's skin. If only Mott actually had his wife. The thought made him shiver.
Huh. I think Mott was the one that was pretending to have kidnapped Alice. And yeah, he seemed like he was very angry with Alan. I guess a lot of that was jealousy because he wanted Hartman's approval, but instead, Hartman was harping on Wake, and so he just it was like, no, why is that? I'm just gonna take it out on him. Yeah. But instead, Alan was ready for a fight, ready to throw down. And he just wasn't expecting that. Mott fails Hartman. Oh, this must be when he gets taken by the dark presence.
Hartman wasn't happy. Mott could see it in his eyes. He quickly lowered his own. He had made a mess of it, and he knew it. The shame of failure was hard to bear. He hadn't expected Wake to say he needed more time, and he blurted out 2 days, less than Wake had asked for, to show him who was in charge. But that wasn't part of Hartman's plan.
Oh, so 2 days was kind of just a seat of his pants thing. What was Hartman's plan? What was Hartman's plan for him? Would it have been to give him 2 more days? It was still less than Wake had asked for to show him who was in charge. So that makes it sound as though Hartman would have been okay with giving him a few more days in order to get the manuscript in full. Hartman really, really wanted this manuscript for some reason. I think we, as the audience members, know it now, but for Hartman, like, what does he know?
Hartman watched as Wake's features slackened. The man was bullheaded, no doubt. Even lying on the bed, he'd almost broken Hartman's nose the second time. But with a little time, he could break Wake down, give him proper direction. Wake was easily the most promising subject he had had. Well, since Tom, really. "Sleep well, Alan," Hartman whispered with a smile. "Let me take care of you." He sniffed hard to clear his throbbing nose, swallowed blood, and barely tasted it.
So this was when Alan was coming back around, and Hartman. This was after he got picked up out of the pond or the lake or whatever. Punched Hartman in the face, and but yeah, Hartman knew he was like Tom Zane, apparently, and he was just happy that he finally got like a real creative within his midst. Yeah, what is up with this guy? Nightingale arrests Wake. Oh, this was in just at the end of the last story episode.
Agent Nightingale stared at the passed out rider. The man was sleeping off one hell of a night. Nightingale felt a stab of envy at Wake's oblivion, but he had a job to do. He put the gun to Wake's head and almost became a murderer. His hand shook and his throat felt tight and dry. Biting his teeth, he tried again to pull the trigger. He lost the nerve. Wake stirred. Nightingale would have to settle for an arrest.
Whoa. Dang. So Nightingale really does have some beef with Alan for some reason. He was about to kill him. He's a freaking FBI officer, and he was about, it says, almost became a murderer. So this isn't about justice, which we kind of guessed that, because he's just being so derisive. He's just putting him down all the time, calling him all sorts of like famous author names mockingly, and like he just comes up on Alan, starts shooting, bam, blam, 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 and that's why Alan ran in the first place, because if someone were shooting at you, you'd be running too, unless you had a weapon, I suppose, and you shot back, but otherwise you'd just be running too. And then he was like, he had to settle for an arrest. Man, Nightingale also, something up with him too. The patients escape the lodge. This is when the dark presence tries to grab Alan, and everyone escapes.
The storm raged on as the Anderson brothers walked unsteadily away from the clinic with the other patients in tow, knowing that this time they wouldn't return. The darkness around them seethed with horrors, but Tor and Odin were unafraid. Their eyes glinted with guile. They knew every secret path, and there was blood on their hands. They had fought these shades before.
Whoa, so they must have been through something similar, which would explain how they know about the dark presence or such. I mean, they even wrote a song in relation to it, and a hint for Alan. But to have fought these shades before, they knew every single path. They seemed very confident, apparently. From this passage, it seems like they were very confident in what they were doing. But were they were going with the other patients, were they leading the other patients, or were they following the other patients? Yeah, we haven't seen them since. The dark presence at
The
large.
dark presence followed the choreography laid out to it in the manuscript, growing stronger and stronger, moving like a storm from one scene of destruction to the next. But it was still bound to follow the story and chained to the dark place it came from. When the story reached the end it longed for, it would finally be free.
Okay, so I think this lays out a little bit more about the dark presence and basically its goals. I guess it's been anchored to presumably Cauldron Lake and possibly to the surrounding area of Bright Falls, and it's just trapped. And the only way it can get freed is by having these creators, these creative types like Zane in his poetry and Alan through his writings to basically create a story or a path for it to become free, be able to be unbound and venture off into the rest of the world. But by that being the only way, it is also bound by the same energies, the same constraints of these stories. So I guess it's a double-edged sword. It wants people to be able to give it an avenue of escape, but if they, like Alan, had any semblance of control, could write an end for it, which is probably how it's going to end. It's like it's written into the story that Alan had finished writing and created. The Anderson brothers in the 70s. This must be when they were the rock and roll band.
It's 1976. Madness reigns at the Anderson farm. Contrary to all logic, the headiest ingredient of their moonshine is unfiltered water from Cauldron Lake.
What?
The Andersons feel like gods. Odin can't stop laughing. He contemplates cutting his eye out. Thor runs across the field, naked, shrieking, hammer in his hand, trying to catch lightning. Their songs have power. Something ancient is stirring in the depths, coming back.
So it seems like there's something about the lake. I think it has to be the dark presence is trapped in the lake, and that's why using it, the unfiltered water from that lake is what gives it, like, makes people like go crazy because of the dark presence. Whatever little amount that you ingest is what makes you go all nuts. And maybe that's how the Andersons also came across the dark presence, because they've been drinking a lot of it. I mean, they were making the moonshine, and it was at some point that, like, they got really went far out. If you don't know about Odin, he has one eye, and that's why he was contemplating cutting his eye out. And as far as Thor, I think this is I don't know if it's anglicized, but this is the in reference to Thor, the god of thunder. And if you have been watching the Marvel movies, that would make more sense to you. That's why he has the hammer. That's Mjolnir, and he's trying to catch lightning, just like in the movies or comics, if that's what your jam is. But that's where these are referencing. But yeah, they must have been ingesting a lot of it, because it says here their songs have power, something ancient. That's got to be the dark presence. I think it's been giving these creators power, like with Tom, like with Alan. The mystery of the missing week. Oh yes, this is when we found out what happened after Alan dived in after Alice.
Alice's screams rang in the stillness of the night. I saw myself run toward the cabin, flashlight in my hand. I followed my past self. I was an out-of-body observer, a time traveler in a crazy drunken dream. This was the beginning. The night Alice had disappeared. The mystery of what had happened during the missing week was about to reveal itself.
I believe this was the narration as we were first personing through the events of what happened that night. Walter at the Anderson farm.
When he stopped the car at the Anderson farm, Walter felt relieved. Oblivion was close at hand. The brothers wouldn't miss a jar of moonshine or two in the booby hatch. But then he saw the man on the porch, and he knew who it was. Driving for his life and knowing it was useless, he didn't realize he was crying until he couldn't see the road for the tears.
I wonder who it was. Was that Danny that he was talking about? The one that killed him? This is the guy that we found. I think this is the guy that we found at the farm, and he called out for Danny. And, yeah. I wonder if he saw... Because he was the one in jail, and he knew that the Dark Presence was taking people over. And if he saw his friend was taken by the Dark Presence, yeah, that would cause him to cry and stuff. And to know what was happening, and then to see a loved one be taken over by, and then to be ultimately killed by them, that's some suffering right there. Hartman considers Mott and Wake.
For a moment, Hartman considered strangling the idiot. Mott was mean-spirited, but easily manipulated, an emotional infant who lived for his approval. Wake, by contrast, was a far more difficult subject. Mott had given him too much leash. In 2 days, who knew what could happen? Hartman would have to find a way to rein him in, and quickly.
Well, Hartman is, I guess, I don't know if he's a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Considering he was Dr. Hartman, I'm gonna assume that he was a psychiatrist. I believe psychiatrists can prescribe medicine and stuff like that. But yeah, this is what happens when you have power and you use it wrong. Like, a doctor, especially with psychiatry, is supposed to help people, but this guy is just using it for his own personal gain. He's manipulating this guy, Mott. And obviously it's very easy because he's pretty simple. But Alan is a much deeper, more complex person because he actually... I mean, he's been through some stuff. He's grown as a person and as an individual. It's much more difficult to manipulate someone like that, especially if you don't really know much about them. I assume that Hartman knew Mott just from being in the area, living there. And that, I guess that explains why Hartman was very upset that Mott gave him 2 days, because 2 days doesn't give you much time to, like, put pressure on someone to do what you want. It makes them feel desperate, and yes, it puts pressure on them, but you don't know what they're going to do. They become unpredictable because of too much pressure. But maybe that's also on Hartman because he's not as smart as he thinks, because he should have known that, especially if he understands personal behavior of people, especially the people that he's manipulating. You'd think that he'd know that Mott would be jealous for his approval, and that if he's mean-spirited, that he would not be the right guy unless you give him specific, clear instruction. But that's not the way it went. Mulligan questions Nightingale's orders. Yeah.
Deputy Mulligan tuned Thornton's chatter out. He didn't think writers were particularly useful people, and a huge manhunt for one struck him as idiotic. Certainly not worth the missed opportunity for coffee and pie. It wasn't even clear what the man had done, except run from them at the trailer park. Mulligan knew he wasn't alone. The sheriff's patience with the Fed was running out.
I just think that the name Mulligan, I don't know if that is supposed to be like a sarcastic thing where, like, you know, you pull a mulligan, but yeah, he's siding with Nightingale just because I don't see the point of this. It's stupid. I'm gonna be biased about it. It wasn't about justice for this guy. It was just he ran from the law. That's enough to make him the bad guy. But dude, did you not see him just open fire on Alan, just clear out of the blue? That doesn't spark you as wrong? like it's okay just to start shooting at people. That I don't know. I don't know, man. Nightingale finds the manuscript. Oh, this must be what happens here in this next episode.
As the deputies hauled Wake and Wheeler away, Agent Nightingale eagerly examined the stack of papers Wake had been carrying. It was incomplete, a collection of random pages, but there was enough. He saw his own name in there, among others. His hand shook with emotion. Finally, it was proof. He had been right all along.
So apparently Nightingale, some reason, I don't know if maybe the events of Alan's last book maybe came true. And if they came true just like it's happening now, maybe Nightingale was the guy or the protagonist in that book and he lost someone. And maybe that was what that's what he's all upset about, because he lost somebody and he saw the book that Alan had written and he must have seen so many parallels that he thought it's his fault. He must have orchestrated this, and he didn't create this story. He just wrote about my life. And then he came across Alan's manuscript that night here, and he sees, oh, I was right. I wasn't crazy. This guy is a jerk. This guy is orchestrating these events, and he's doing it now to this town. Maybe that's his story. Maybe that's what's going on with Nightingale. All right, that is the end of it. Wow. I thought, man, so much stuff is going on. I'm really glad to take a look at these things. They give you a lot more insight and some deeper background and characterization, and you just get a sense of things more. Especially like I don't know how it is watching the Let's Play, but playing it, I get engrossed in the game so much that sometimes I'm not actively thinking about the story. So sometimes some of these are a refresher, and even if it's not a refresher, it helps to bring everything together. And as you can see, there's a lot of questions that come out that arise from these manuscript pages, and it just gets you thinking, like what's going on, what's going to happen, and you can kind of formulate some hypotheses or some predictions as to what's going to happen and what's going on behind the scenes. Oh, I look forward to the next set. I hope you look forward to the next set as well, and I hope you join me to read through the next set, as well as the gameplay, obviously, to get through the game story like normal. I hope you'll join me for either, both, and until then, bye.